Welcome to the Beat the Banks podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Fuller, and I've got Mr. Wade Borth, one of my insurance partners here in Phoenix, and we are going to be doing a book review of Nelson Nash's Becoming Your Own Banker. Let's dive into this.
So why did Nelson Nash call this book The Infinite Banking Concept, right? Becoming Your Own Banker, The Infinite Banking Concept. Well, Kyle and I were just having this conversation before we got started here, and he says most people, especially financial advisors, say, hey, I flipped through the book, went to the end, looked at the numbers. Well, that's how most people attack books, right? They look at these things, they want to go to the back, see how it ends. But Nelson understood that this doesn't end. This is your life, your legacy for an infinite amount of time. So that's why he called it the infinite banking concept, right? It's infinite. So don't flip to the back of the book. Kyle and I are going to go through this thing page by page. And I'm going to point out some things on the book that, I've read this book 40, 50 times, maybe even 60, a lot of times. And probably the first 20 of these times, I skipped over one of the most important parts of the book. Kyle, I don't know if you did the same thing, but I go back to the introduction of the 5th edition. Now this is on page 3. Like if you're like me, like most people really, I always skip the introduction. I go right to the meat. Let's see what's there. But after we started some book clubs, started doing some studying this is one of the most valuable pieces of the book. And I would encourage you, if you read nothing else, read just this page. Kyle, what do you take from this very first introduction? I love this part of it. I just want to hear what your take is.
Yeah, this is one of my favorite pages. And, we've talked about self-mastery in earlier episodes, Wade. And when my first mentor in this business, I said, hey, what do I need to do to get to your level in 10 years? And he said, read this book every week for 40 weeks. And so that's exactly what I did. I wasn't going to debate him, right? He had all the success. I'm just going to follow his system and his model. And it helped me understand this book tremendously. And the more times you read it, especially year over year, as you're growing in this concept, you read something and it hits you totally different because you're a different person at that time frame. And people that skip this first page, it's a huge mistake because this first page outlines everything in the future. But yet what a lot of people do, specifically financial advisors that I've worked with in the past, they skip to the end, like you said. I looked at the numbers didn't make sense. Well, of course they didn't. You have no idea what the problem is. You don't even know what the book's about. You missed the whole point, which is why I love page 1. And right from the get-go, he says the infinite banking concept is a text for a 10-hour course of instruction about the power of dividend-paying whole life insurance. 10 hours. When we're teaching our seminars and stuff, we'll do a lot of intro presentations, 40 minutes. I always tell everyone, this is just that, an intro presentation. Most people that I've worked with, Wade, over the last 10 years need about 8 to 10 hours of exposure to this idea before all the light bulbs go off and they go, oh my gosh, I get it. Yeah. And Nelson hits it right here. About 10 hours is what most people need.
Yeah. It's pretty amazing that he laid that out in the very first paragraph, right? It's about anything else you do in life. You have to read and understand and be absorbed in something for at least a certain amount of hours before you can start to open your mind up to what those possibilities are. And this goes, I love probably one of the lines in here. He says, this is not a sales tool. This is really just a roadmap.
It's education.
It's education, right? On what you need to do. And it's about you becoming your banker. It's not about Kyle or Wade becoming your banker. That's the real strength of this book. It's not a sales tool for life insurance professionals. So,
just you saying that, one of our top wealth strategists and partners at Factum, Mr. David Zapata, he talks about this a lot. That he says one of his favorite words in that phrase, becoming your own banker, is becoming. That is a verb, right? Becoming is a transformation. Yeah. You have to develop into this.
Yeah.
It's a powerful word.
Yeah. And this is the manual to make that happen, right? Yeah. We all need a roadmap. Otherwise we don't know where we're going. So that's a strong word, becoming. And so when you start thinking about, what Nelson's saying, and the beauty of what he's done in this book is he took a lot of really deep concepts and put them into a book that's less than 100 pages. I mean, that's, in all reality, it's probably more like 60 if you took out all the charts and the graphs.
Yeah.
That's the amazing part. It's short, but it's so concise and it's so deep. And every time I read it, because I've changed in my knowledge and my understanding and my position in life, it means different things to me every time I read it.
Yeah.
So
it's incredible that he put that much wisdom and experience and philosophy into a book of this size.
Yep.
Incredible. So one of the first things I have on here, Wade, he says this book demonstrates that your need for finance during your lifetime is much greater than your need for protection. Yep. A lot of times when people think of insurance, they go immediately to death benefit. And I'm not saying that that's unimportant, because that's very important. But if you change the way you look at things, the things you look at start to change. And he's saying we're looking at this whole life policy as a tool, a banking tool, to finance the things you will need in your life. So that need for a family, a business, an individual is much greater than your need for protection right now.
Yeah.
The death benefit will be there when it's time, but this need for our financing is so big. And when people come to like our seminars, they see our courses, when you start to calculate just what that number is for like something for vehicles, let alone mortgages, everything else you can finance, this is not a small number. This is like millions of dollars that right now the big banks are getting because they think like the banks and they own that function in our life. And we've just been taught, get into business, get into investing. Don't even worry about the banking side. That's for someone else.
Yeah. Who's telling us that quote? It's the banks, right? They're telling us not to worry about the banking function because they have taken control of it. That, and I use this question a lot. I said, if you're not controlling the banking function, who is?
Someone is more than happy to do that for you.
Right. And then the other question is, are you controlling your business? If you're a business owner and you can't make a decision without the bank, who really controls your business? If you're not the ultimate person that gives up the thumbs up or thumbs down if a project can happen, are you truly in control of the business? So one of the things that, I hear all the time is like, wow, this is a terrible investment. Kyle, you've never heard that, have you?
Yeah, that's something we hear. You'll hear it 10,000 times in your first 10 years in this business.
Yeah. And in Nelson's book, right on, again, we're just still on the intro page. He says, this book is not about investments of any kind. It's about how one finances the things in their life. Right. And it starts with savings, right? You can't finance even your own stuff. You can't be your own personal financier unless you start the saving process. And that goes into Nelson's book, and we'll get into that. It's about your mindset and how you approach money and your relationship with money.
Let's go over that one more time.
Okay.
This book is not about investments of any kind. If people would read that statement right there, they wouldn't get to the end of the book and say, these numbers don't look good compared to my investments. Well, of course, he told you on the front page exactly what this was not. Why are we so confused by the end? Like, this is why you have to read this page and you have to go back and reread it. And, whole life insurance has nothing to do with investing because it's not an investment.
No.
But in the big wide world, that's one of the biggest misconceptions that we hear and we have to debunk daily. Right? I wake up and I get ready to be like, all right, whole life's not an investment. We got to go tell someone else today. That's how common it is. And that's why no one can see the magic behind it. It's the equivalent of someone looking at a Toyota Camry and a Toyota Tundra. They're both vehicles, but they serve way different purposes. Would you take your Camry off-roading? No. I guess you could, but people would look at you like, why are you using that? That's not what that's for. Whole life has more in common with a banking tool or a savings vehicle than an investment. Once you can separate that, then you go, now these numbers are starting to look really good.
Yeah. And just to that point, the whole life is just the tool in that process.
Yeah.
The banking process is just the way we think about money, right? So we're not talking about actually starting a bank. We're talking about taking control of the banking function in your life. And the tool that is the most effective, the most important, is a properly structured whole life insurance. And you can look at banks, you can look at corporations, they all do it. They all understand it. So then why isn't everybody else?
So it's a mindset.
It's a mindset.
So let's go there real quick. Wade, were you ever an employee?
Yes.
Okay, so was I. And you own a business now?
Yep.
So do I.
Yep.
Was there a transition in mindset going from an employee to a business owner?
100%. Big transition.
Not a small one. It's huge. I will say it's just as big going from an employee, a self-employed business owner or investor to going to a banker. It's that drastic. It's a mindset shift that has to happen first. And once it's there, now there's some rules you want to follow.
Yeah.
And if you can follow the banking rules, because banks have rules, right? We want to follow those just like they do. Then you insert the right product or environment, the piece. That's the whole life insurance policy. That's what unlocks all the potential that we're talking about. You need those three elements together.
Yeah. And then to that point, and Nelson makes it just on the same page. He says, the process of banking goes on no matter what. Think about that. The process of banking goes on no matter what. If you're successful, not successful, it's going to always be happening in your life. So he makes the point in the book too that you're going to be in your business, whatever it is, and you're also in the banking business, if you know it or not, because that process goes on forever. And so the question is, are you willing to take control of that banking function? First, you have to recognize it as being there, admitting, hey, it's going to go on no matter what. And B, now do I want to take control of it? And once you understand how profitable it is, man, you're going to want to really take control of it. And that's the mind shift that comes.
Wade, do you ever have people ask you, like, is IBC a scam? Like, you ever had that question? Is this one of those things? And I'm like, if people would read the book, it'd tell you on the first page, this is not a procedure to get rich quickly. To the contrary, it takes long range planning. The reason this process, this book, this idea is not a scam is because the first third of the book that we're going to cover right now has no strategy involved. It says you got to fix your human behavior. You have to be a better saver. Yeah. That's a serious problem we have in our country. So the fact that he's saying it's not a procedure to get rich quick, it takes long range planning, and you got to fix your human behaviors around money first, I would say that's the ultimate truth. That's why this thing works, because he's addressing human behavior up front before we jump into strategy on how this is going to change your life. But that's how most things are pitched. All you got to do is buy this thing and your life's A-okay. No one's telling you that, hey, you're going to have to become somebody else. You got to work on yourself. You got to build some better habits and disciplines. And then you could do this concept and it would work out really well for you.
Becoming, again, going back to the title of the book, Becoming. So yeah, that's so true. Is like now you have to, if you want to become that new person, now you just have to work on yourself first. We have to become better savers. It always starts with that, because a policy, any other tool is just that, it's a tool. But if you're not a master craftsman with that tool, then quite frankly, it can even be dangerous.
Mm-hmm. Oh, it is. Yeah. Which is why we start with education. You have to be educated and you've got to be a disciplined saver before I'd recommend you buy a whole life insurance policy and start down the journey of becoming your own banker. Yeah. You can't do that first part. This is not right for you. You should not do this.
Yes. So what does it look like to becoming your own banker? I mean, just in a high level approach, you've dealt with a lot of clients and we've had a lot of conversations around this. What do you see as a typical transformation in people, right?
Yeah, I think when you start talking about that flow of money, that's where people start making the connections. So if you think about all the income that you've had in your life, Wade, right? Those dollars flow through you, through your income, through your checking account, whatever it is, for active income or passive income. Those dollars just flow through our lives. And what we've been told to do with them is great. Take a few of those for a few short moments and then go invest those to get some more money. But banking is literally the exact opposite conversation of investing. So when people invest, what you're doing is you're intentionally separating the control of your money to go purchase something that should bring you more money in the future. That's what investing is. Yep. And how educated you are determines the risk there. Banking is the exact opposite conversation. Banking is about dollars that flow into our life that we capture and control permanently in an environment that we always have access to. That's a huge difference. So I think when I talk about like my old checking accounts I have and used to have, money flows through those, right? But when you own a private banking system utilizing whole life insurance, now money flows to that policy. And once it's there, it is mine forever. I capture and harness that dollar. Banks are masters at controlling that flow of money. Yeah. Yep. If you look at the equation of life, investors need money, banks or business owners, employees, self-employed individuals, it's all flowing through someone else's bank. Do you know how much money, if you just stop and think about that for a second, just the money that's flowed through your life, how many of those dollars have you kept in your control permanently? Yeah. Very few of them. What if we were just change our paradigm and say, what if we created an environment that more of those dollars could stop there? And once they were there, they were ours forever. That's a huge number. Yep.
Yeah. And so you made a comment about, using, a whole life insurance policy, and a lot of people try to figure out why that's so important. And I always tell people, hey, don't take it from me. Just go to Wells Fargo, and the number $20 billion is going to pop up in your head. Go to Bank of America, like $25 billion are going to pop up in your head. And this is the amount of money that they keep in whole life insurance. But they tell you not to put the money there. I always find that kind of interesting. But the key to this is like, why are we using a contract that has predetermined exit strategies to put our money? So let me say that one more time again. This is why banks love them so much. This is why banks keep their money in life insurance companies versus in the other banks, right? Think about what a life insurance contract is. It is a professionally managed bond and real estate portfolio done at an institutional level, guaranteed never to go backwards. What's not to love about that? You got safety and control of your money, and you're going to get a bond type of return somewhere in that neighborhood over your lifetime. And if you ever want to get out, it's got a predetermined exit strategy telling you exactly what that minimum amount is going to be that you can get out. And when you graduate from this world, it's going to give you dollars. There's really no downside except for short-term thinking.
That's a powerful asset to have in your foundation.
Yes.
Now, the characteristics you just described do not describe an investment.
No.
Because the guarantees in the whole life, which is, it's the only asset with contractual guarantees, which is why big corporations and banks and wealthy families love it. But middle America has missed this education. They miss it, and they jump right to, low rate of return, expensive to own. This makes it the worst investment of all time, which is what you'll hear on a regular basis. You take a step back and you look at it for what it really is. Banks don't own so much whole life insurance because it's a great investment. Their loans are the best investment they're ever going to make. If they can take your deposit in and pay you 0.05 and lend it out at a credit card at 22%, that spread is like 37,000%.
Right.
But what they don't have is a superior savings environment, even in their own world, which is why they use insurance companies.
Yeah.
They save money there because it's literally the safest place they can lay their foundation.
Yeah.
We should do the same thing.
Yeah. Just have a solid foundation, build everything up on that. I mean, everybody understands building your house on sand versus, on stone.
Yeah.
And they understand. Banks have understood this. This is one of the things that, although there's been a lot of bank failures, and we're going through a bunch right now in the United States, the ones that are sound or ones that probably can survive are those that have the biggest safe reserves.
Isn't that something?
Yeah.
Sounds like liquidity plays a pretty important role in longevity, right?
Nobody wants liquidity.
Nobody wants that.
You got to be 100% invested at all times.
Yeah, you need to be leveraged to the hilt. So let's talk about this statement over on page 11. Money flows from the pool through our hands to meet our needs. So we're talking about one big pool of money that exists out there. Part of that flows through our hands to meet our needs. But somewhere in the process, it all ends up in the banking system. And it's all a matter of how much of the banking function do you own and control as it relates to your needs.
Yeah.
So right on the very next page, Nelson identifies a problem. And this is what you have to understand with this concept early on. It's one of the first things we teach people when they start learning about this. Because if you don't understand this problem he's identified, the rest of the book will not make sense. The numbers won't make sense, nothing else. He said you finance everything in life. And what he means by that is you either borrow money and pay interest, or you use your own money and give up interest you could have earned. And the problem is all this money ends up in someone else's bank, which is tying to the page previous. So here's my analogy for that. You can pay interest to a bank, and yeah, you're going to make interest payments. Everyone knows that. So what do? What I was taught as a young boy from my dad, who learned from his dad, you got to pay cash. So you don't pay interest payments. Well, when I saved up and paid cash for my car, correct, I did not pay anyone interest payments. What did the guy do that I paid the cash to? Where did he go with that money first thing?
To the bank?
To the bank. They got the deposit. I mean, they got it right back. It all flows to them, right? They don't care if we pay cash or finance. It comes to them no matter what. What I didn't understand is when I gave up that cash, $3,200 for my first car, that money is gone forever. That's what we call an interest cost. If that money would have been in a policy first, I would have captured it, earned that guaranteed interest rate in my savings environment for the rest of my life.
So think about that for 1 second. That money is lost and gone forever. It's gone to somebody else. It resides in somebody else's bank or banking account. I mean, this is the real beauty of banking. And Nelson said this too. He said, and something along the lines that he said, if you take all the money in the world, separate it out equally amongst all the individuals that are in the world, he says within 10 years, 97% of that money would be back in 3% of the population hands, because those are the 3% that understand the banking process.
It's not business owners and it's not investors. It's the bankers because they are in the middle of every transaction that's happening.
Yep.
Without them, all of our other businesses, our investments come to a screeching halt.
Yep. So the question is, how much of that banking function do you want to own?
How much should you own in your life?
All of it.
As much as you possibly can.
I mean,
and as soon as that light bulb goes off for people, that's when we hear the statement, I wish I would have known this 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Me too.
Yeah, I do too. I mean, I remember the first time I read Nelson's book, and we'll get into, how it got started. But first time I read his book, I'm like, there's something there. But it was so contrary. And again, I've been in the insurance business at this time for about 15 years.
Yeah.
I'm like, there's something there. There's huge. But I don't get it. So I set the book down. I had to read it. Second time, did the same thing. Third time, I finally picked up the book and got enough, took enough action to call Nelson and said, I need to hear more about this. I need you to explain this to me.
Yeah.
And so I called the number, he picked it up, and we started a relationship from that point going forward. That was so huge because that man had a lot of wisdom. And it was interesting is that he wanted to grow and nurture you to a point where you could think for yourself. He didn't want to be the one that gave you the answers. He wanted you one to develop the answers. And that really came from, he had a situation in his life back in the early 80s. I think people need to understand this, is that when he was doing what all the financial professionals told him to do, go buy real estate, get into debt, leverage. This is in the 70s. Then what happened in like early 81 or mid 81? Interest rates went to 21%.
Mm-hmm.
He's stuck with really $750,000 of debt at 21%.
Back then. So think about what that number would be today. Depends on what interest rate or inflation rate you use. It'd be like being in, say, $3 million of debt with 20% interest. Can you do the math real quick what that is? That's $600,000 of interest payments per year. I was just about to say that.
Oh, sure. I just was going to help you out. So, but think about the anxiety that people have because of that demand on, just the stress and what that causes. Stress causes the most damage to us than anything out there.
Yeah.
And Nelson was praying and he said, there's got to be a better way. And he found it. That's how he came across this. Is like under immense stress and pressure, he says, I found a better way.
Yeah.
And he encapsulated it in this book.
He realized he had been paying large premiums into his insurance policies and he could go get the money quickly with no hassle through that contract at a much lower interest rate. So he borrowed the money from his policies and started getting rid of that high interest debt.
Right.
And it says that's where this concept was born, right? He just saw something that was sitting there already, but he couldn't see it because he was thinking the same way that everyone else was.
Right. He was doing and thinking what I call conditioned thinking. And everybody on my podcast will hear that. He's like, we call it conditioned thinking. We've been conditioned to think a certain way. And he was conditioned to think a certain way until it got to the point where he couldn't. He had to find a better way.
Yeah.
So now we have a choice as individuals. We can go through that same process of pain and anguish to find a better way, or we can accept some of these things and open our mind up and be educated to say, oh, maybe there is a better way, and now start taking control of that banking function in your life.
Yeah, we've got to be willing to change our thinking.
Yeah.
So let me just touch on something real quick on this page on imagination. He says the infinite banking concept is an exercise in imagination, reason, logic, and prophecy. I think once you see it, you'll never be able to unsee this. It just makes sense once you get into it. And the fun part and the infinite part to me is the imagination. Like I usually tell people when they start working with me, I'm like, give me 3 to 5 years with you to get the education down. Once the foundation's laid, it's so exciting because they get to use their imagination to use this system for whatever they want to do. Some people use it for investing. Some people use it for business. Some people use it for family. It's literally infinite what you can use your banking process for. And that's where it starts to let people, live, because they can use it to benefit and live, their abundance in 5 areas of life. And everyone's going to use it slightly different.
Yeah, exactly. And especially when you go back and understand that he put this first. He put imagination, at the very beginning of the book. Because if you don't have the ability to have an imagination, to imagine you being in a better place and be able to imagine what your abundant, your perfect life is going to look like, there's a real problem there, is that you have to have that imagination to make that happen.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things I was going to mention to you is, you mentioned that it's a process that we have to, it's a transformation process, a process of what we're doing with our money. What most people understand is like, they think it's a product.
Yeah.
They'll read this and they go, oh, I need that. Or, that's the worst place to put your money. but it's not, because it goes back to the imagination. It's a process of how we think about money and how we respect our money more than we respect the bank's money.
Yeah. And to tie that to like an investing conversation, it's like people say, well, that's a bad investment. I don't think there's such a thing as a bad investment. There's bad investors. You're the problem. It's how you think about it. Some people can take one asset and do really well with it, and where someone else could completely ruin it. It starts with your thinking and your mindset first. So if you come at it from a product and you say, oh, the product is not the problem. The problem is you're thinking about it. Like, you've got to change that first. Then you can see it for what it is. When you put all those things together, now you've got something magical. Now you've got something called infinite banking. It's a mindset with rules, with the right piece, which is the whole life insurance policy.
Yep, exactly. It's the process of controlling that flow of money that you just talked about. So, Nelson uses a great analogy, and he talks about a grocery store. And anybody that's read the book understands, the term "don't steal the peas."
Don't steal the peas.
Don't steal the peas. Right. So what does he mean by that? I mean, why does he use a grocery store? You ever think about that? I asked him one time why the heck he used a grocery store.
I only got to talk with him one time, and it was pretty brief. It was awesome because all I did is I just told him, hey, just so you know, we just had our first boy. And because of you, he'll never have to go to a commercial bank for any of his financing needs. He'll always come to our family bank.
He had a light up when he said that.
Oh, yeah. Him and his wife were just so sweet right there, and just a tender man, right? But I would imagine that he used a grocery store because it's so relatable. Yeah. We've been in a grocery store probably every week for our entire life, right?
So I asked him, I said, Nelson, why did you use a grocery store analogy? There's a lot of things we could use. Some of the people we know use car examples. Nelson used a grocery store. And so he looked at me and he says, Wade, I can obviously see you've been in a grocery store before.
He didn't say that, did he?
He didn't say that.
Oh, man, what a jokester.
And he says, I've seen you been in a grocery store before. He says, so everybody's been in a grocery store. He wanted to make it so it was so relatable that everybody could understand what this meant. And so that's why he just chose the grocery store, because it was relatable. But the point he was making is it was about inventory, and how are you treating your inventory as an owner? Because you're going to own the function of the banking, right? So if you own a grocery store, and he makes a point, if you own a grocery store, are you paying retail or are you paying wholesale for that can of peas that are on the shelf?
Yeah. What would you do?
Because I know a lot of business owners that, well, like, hey, I'm going to take this for my business, or a family member says, hey, make me a deal on this.
Give me the family discount.
I
own a business, so I'm going to take this I'm going to take this product. I'm not going to charge myself,
right?
Because I own the business.
So the question is, what's the long-term impact of that?
Yeah.
You've taken
is that a good or bad habit?
No, it's a terrible habit.
Right.
But it sounds good because it feels good a little bit at the time. But it will drive you into bankruptcy as quick as anything.
That is not a long-term habit you want around.
No.
Taking from your business.
Yeah. And if your family understood, if you own any business, your family understood, what this means, they would never ask for a discount. Quite frankly, they'd say, make it the premium price.
Yeah. I'll pay a little bit extra.
I love you so much, I'm going to pay you extra. Yeah. That's because what that means is when you take a can of peas off the shelf, like Nelson talks about that, there's 3 cents of profit in that can of peas. That 3 cents of profit plus another handful of cans of peas will buy additional inventory. If you think about this, we're talking the financing game. Our inventory just happens to be cash. And so we need to have a warehouse to store our cash. And that's where the whole life policy comes into play. But if you steal the peas, you've also stolen the future inventory. And then it's a death spiral it's a race to the bottom.
Right.
So that's the analogy that, the can of peas idea kind of came from, is that there's only so much profit in each can of peas. And the instant you start stealing it, it puts your business in jeopardy, because now you've reduced the amount of inventory you can have for the future. And it also goes to a little bit of character. He talks a lot about what's your character. If you're willing to steal or lie, is that somebody that you want to do business with? If that's you, if that's me, and do I want to do business with myself? Because some people aren't meant to control the banking function in their lives.
That's really good. And just to relate that to anyone listening that already has policies and is doing this, the analogy there is you have a private banking system. Do not abuse it. If you're going to borrow against that cash value and the loan interest rate is 5.25% or whatever it is at the time of this podcast, right? You better pay your banking system back with more interest. If you abuse your system, take policy loans, never make plans to pay it back, refill the shelf, if you will, You're going to run your system into the ground. This is not a system you want to abuse. So my rule for my family, so if we own a grocery store, if we took something off the shelf, we're replacing it with 10% additional. That's my family rule. We take a policy loan, $10,000, we replace it with $11,000 because I know those extra dollars going in now builds us the right habits. We understand the long-term benefits. I'm always in a position of capital or money in the future, which means I'm always going to be ready to jump on opportunity.
Yep.
When, not if, when it comes.
Yep. Opportunities are always going to be there if you have cash. Yeah. And to that point, you think about, having available cash and not stealing the peas, like Nelson says, in our family banking system, we'll borrow money. We'll always pay back at a higher rate.
Yeah.
And people say, well, why do you want to, it's my money. Why should I pay that back at a higher rate? Well, because I want to treat it better than I treat Wells Fargo's money. If I would borrow money from the Wells Fargo or Bank of America or Chase, whoever it is, they're going to charge me 5 or 6%. And I pay it. Most people are going to pay it.
Yeah.
So why wouldn't you do that with your own money?
Well, and I think people get that wrong too. I think they get confused. Why would I borrow my money and pay myself back? You're not. You're a second player in the money game right now. So consumer Kyle goes to Kyle's private banking system. Those are separate entities. They're separate people. So when consumer Kyle borrows from banker Kyle charges consumer Kyle some interest. And when consumer Kyle pays back banker Kyle with interest, did I lose any control of that money? What are we complaining about, Wade?
Right.
You're not borrowing from yourself. You just happen to own two businesses.
Right.
That's all it really is.
And do you want both your businesses to be profitable?
I actually want the banking one to be more profitable.
But you still want your other business. If you have a real estate business, you want the real estate business to be profitable.
Correct.
You want the banking business to be profitable.
Yeah.
That only happens if you're honest on both ends, right? And so you have to measure, is what I'm doing in real estate or whatever business you're in, is it profitable? Is it worth my time and effort and pain? And you don't know that unless you're paying all your expenses, which includes interest and principal.
Yeah, exactly.
So most people, if they can't answer this question, they don't really understand Nelson's book. Kyle, what's the problem?
Problem is that you finance everything in life. We're going to talk about this repeatedly because you have to get this piece down. This problem that he addresses in here is in the book numerous times.
Right.
You finance everything in life. You either pay up interest or you give up interest you could have earned. And what most people are doing out there is they have a very low savings rate, which is a huge problem.
Yeah.
And what have we been typically told from typical financial planning, Wade? They'll look at someone and they won't address, hey, where are you spending money? Can we change some of your habits? They go to the savings and they say, what's your discretionary income? How much can you save?
Right.
Let's take that 5 or 10%. Before being generous, it's 10. Let's take that.
Being generous, it's 5.
Let's take that and go get a higher rate of return, which usually means more risk because most people aren't really investing. They're speculating. So they go put their savings at risk. But if you look at the 90% that's leaving their household every month, you could redirect that flow of money as a banker. When I first saw that, I was like, that makes all the sense in the world to me. I got money leaving for all these things. Wouldn't I want to redirect that flow of money to an entity I owned and controlled, as opposed to trying to make my 5 and 10% savings rate work way harder? There's a huge paradigm shift there.
Right. Yeah. You think about, I look at the chart that's on page 17 of the book and, it talks about the annual spending patterns. And I go back to, I think of a con artist on the streets of New York. They get you to look and focus on the wrong thing so they can steal your wallet while you're not watching, while you're not looking. And if you think about this for a second, most people are going to sit around the water cooler and, they're saving, $10,000 into their 401k, and they're all arguing about, hey, I'm getting 6% versus your 5%, right? So he's earning $600. The other guy's earning $500. They spend time and energy and so much focus for $100 versus what's the real problem.
Right. That 90% that's leaving.
That $80,000 you just spent on a new truck that you financed at 7%. That who's all happy with that? The banker's happy. The car dealer's happy. Who's the one who has to pay all their bills?
Right.
You.
Yeah.
So the question is, if you can control that, you don't care about that extra, going from 5% rate of return on your investments to 6%, because that's only $100. How about the $10,000 or $20,000 in interest payments you're going to be making on those trucks in the future? That's real dollars.
What's interesting, Wade, is last week I was with one of my coaches, and we were just having a conversation at dinner, and he's a big real estate guy, and we were talking about the amount of interest that homeowners pay in the first 5 to 7 years of a mortgage.
Mm-hmm.
And it was really interesting to hear his perspective on it, because he's spot on. Because we know 85 to 90% of your payments are interest in the first 5 to 7 years. And what's the average time frame most Americans move? Every 5 to 7 years. Yeah. You think that's a coincidence?
Not at all.
And so he was saying, he said, what I believe is that the bankers sat down and said, we should build a 30-year product to get the payment low enough to get them to buy, so that 90% of their payments are interest, and they'll move every 5 to 7 years. I'm like, that is 100% what happens. Yep. That is exactly what they would have built to encourage the behaviors that they want to see from us. Now, we're so conditioned, like you said, distracted to take 10% or 5% we're saving, go try to make 10 or 12%. Meanwhile, 85% of our payments to our mortgage is going to a bank,
right,
to keep them profitable. Wouldn't it be smart to start building up our own private banking system so we could do that for ourselves in the future, Wade?
Exactly. And so how do you start that, though? What's the first steps to start doing that? And Nelson addresses that here. It's like, the thing that most people are afraid to do, well, they don't think long term, but they're afraid to capitalize.
Yeah.
This is the savings conversation that we have so successfully with a lot of our clients. We want them to capitalize. We want them to save. And it doesn't start with anything else besides changing your mindset and a commitment. Like, now I'm going to put some money away. I'm going to start capitalizing. I'm going to put some dollars away. And I really want to take control of the banking function, but you can't do it out of thin air. It takes a commitment.
Takes some time.
Yep.
Now, let's talk about creating a bank. I think a lot of times people get freaked out when they hear about, and this is one of the reasons why people don't think in this realm. We're very familiar with being an employee, self-employed, business owner, investor. But the banking conversation is very foreign to us. I feel like it's almost out there, like, oh, I can't do that. And I think the reason why is because people think of a physical location and a bank.
Yeah.
And if you were going to go do that, you would need around $20 million. You need a bank charter. You need a ton of connections, and you need to probably wait 10 or 15 years to get in line, because there's other people who want to do that too. So when you put all that together, the pool of people that can actually do that is so small. So we think, we'll never do that. But if you just follow a system and a model, you can look at, what do the banks do with all that profit they make? Well, they save it into whole life insurance, and Tier 1 capital is their foundation.
No.
Okay, so there's model number one. Let's start saving our money where they save theirs. And when it's built up a little bit, what if we just started moving our money for ourselves the same way a bank moves their money? Interesting. Now we're controlling that flow of money for us. Well, you can do that without any of those things we just described up front. You don't need $20 million to do that. You can start with 5 or 10% of your income.
Right.
Spend a few years capitalizing the system. And like Nelson says earlier in his book, you want a big system, put a lot of money in. You want a small system, put a little in.
Right.
We'd always encourage everyone to start affordable so it's comfortable getting going. But the more you learn, like I started with one $8,000 premium policy per year. And now our system is quite substantial less than 10 years later. We can finance a lot of things in my family now. Yeah. That 10 years is not that long. You grow into this, you become, right?
Yeah. And think about, why he started with imagination. I would just say, imagine how much money you would have in your hand if you could save between 10 and 30% of all the income you've ever earned. That's the power of imagination. It's like, and then once you can start to imagine that, then you can say, why not? And you don't have to do it all at once. You can start and say, okay, I'm going to start at 10%, but have an idea of, like, I'm going to have a system of policies throughout my life. And that's what Nelson talks about quite a bit here too, is like, he says, it doesn't happen overnight. It took him 13 years, by the way, to get out what he calls away from the snakes and the dragons.
Mm.
So he even though he understood it, he just knew he couldn't do it all at once, but he had a pathway. And that's what saved him from going crazy, is that he knew he had a pathway to get out. But he knew it would take time and commitment.
Yeah, it takes long-term thinking.
Yeah.
This is not a get-rich-quick plan. 3 to 5 years, I tell people you'll get a lot of the bulk of the education, and then you just keep growing from there. And it never stops. This becomes a lifestyle.
Yeah. I have to kind of laugh a little bit too. You said that, it takes millions of dollars in time and effort to, to start a bank. My thought was like, well, who sets those rules up? Why do they want to set up to have it be so expensive to start a bank?
Probably because they don't want everyone else doing it.
Right.
They like to be in that position.
So when they hear people like, oh, you're going to, become your own banker, they scoff at it. The reason why they would scoff at it is because they don't understand. So therefore they're scared.
Mm-hmm.
And quite honestly, they don't want you to think it's a viable solution. But people are doing this all the time. And I hear this a lot from my clients, like, well, if this is so great, why isn't everybody doing it? I'm like, they are.
A ton of people are.
I mean, you look at the amount of money that banks and corporations own.
Yeah.
Should tell you, don't take my word for it. Follow people that have had success, right? The banks put a ton of money there. So why aren't we emulating that? Now, don't emulate some of the things that have put banks into trouble, but at least look at what are they doing foundationally. And why can't we do that at a smaller scale? It's for us.
Well said.
So now we're into, there's a lot of good stuff here. Nelson talks about, there's one pool of money. And this is pretty interesting because you think about it, he was a pilot and he used to, talk about water a lot. And he said, water is like, there's one pool of water in this world. It all flows, right? So all the water is connected in some way or another, either through the air and so on and so forth. And he was like, that's what money is. And he says, who's the gatekeeper? Who has control of those dollars? And that's the real key. If you understand that money is just this one big pool, and there's certain people that have access to it. The question is, why don't you have access? Why don't you partner with a company that has access to those big pools of money?
And you can do it really easily.
How? How can you do that, Kyle? Come on.
You go get a insurance policy with a strong mutually owned carrier. You find a good coach that's going to teach you how to implement this process. The rest is on you. Education, long-term thinking, discipline.
Yep. Time, money, and discipline is what it takes.
That's it.
Yeah. And then once you have access to those dollars, then it's like now is really where the work begins. And this is where I have to have the discipline, because now I want that thing to thrive. And again, first couple of years, I'm like, this isn't, it's working, but it's just not big enough. Well, then start another policy, start another process. Nelson used to always call them, starting branch banks, but it's still having access to that one pool of money. So, we talk about having a system of policies to create your family banking system, my family banking system. It's not all in one. So don't think you have just one crack at it.
Yeah.
You're going to have multiple policies over your lifetime. As your knowledge grows, as your income grows, and that system of policies will get you access to a larger and larger pool of money.
That's it. So let's do a quick review of part 1, Wade.
Sure.
So the importance of imagination. You've got to start there and be able to rethink your thinking.
Yeah.
Now let's remember the grocery store business. It's the value of learning how to get into business in which you're a consumer and an owner with the same thing that you sell.
Yep.
You're two players in the money game is how I look at that. And then the money problem. Only money left over after paying taxes can be spent. So for the average person, they're spending 34% in just interest to finance car purchases, homes, various other purchases. This money's gone forever because of that interest cost. It's making the persons in the banking business very wealthy, and that can be ours forever if we get into the banking business.
Right. And the banking business is just that. It's just a process of understanding how money flows.
So then it's just creating a bank like the ones we already know. We're just going to save where they save. We're going to move our money the same way they move theirs, and we're going to get good at becoming a banker.
Right.
We got to learn. We got to develop. We got to grow.
And then how, you really have to understand how a dividend paying life insurance policy works inside that system, right? This is money that's safe, secure, guaranteed. And so it makes for a tremendous asset to where you can store and hold your dollars. That's why it's so valuable. Yeah. It's not, and it always goes up, right? That's the other key that most people forget too, is it always goes up. It always appreciates.
If the market's good or
market, what are you talking? We're not an investment.
Does exactly. The policy goes up guaranteed. That's one of the strongest words that exists in the whole life insurance realm. Yep. People scoff at that. Why do you like whole life? Because of guarantees. Yes, that's exactly why I like them, because no other asset has that. Yep. That's why we put it at the foundation.
Contractually guaranteed. Think about this from a standpoint of why banks love whole life insurance. It's a contract guaranteed never to go backwards. So for them, they're like, then it's easy to bank because I know what dollar's there. So therefore, I can go out and make a loan based on that asset.
See, and that feature, I think people look to get rich quick. That's why they don't look at whole life properly.
Right.
I need 3 to 5 years. Whole life keeps you rich.
It doesn't make you poor.
Right.
It keeps you rich.
That constant compounding and those 8 benefits you get with whole life, if you've been on our video series or seen our savings conversation, that is why we put it at the foundation. It has so many benefits that you will never find in a different savings vehicle. Not all of them, especially not the guarantees.
Yeah, that's so true. It's foundational. It starts with, everything starts there. And people that have wealth and people that own banks and large businesses, they all know that access to cash and liquidity is key.
Yeah.
So, and then there's the capitalization phase. That's probably the last part of the review. Is like, you have to get started. You should want to get started. You don't have to do anything. You should want to get started. Start putting money away, start saving, start changing your habits a little bit, because this is a finite, infinite game, right? We're doing this not for ourselves, well, which we are, and for our kids and our kids' kids and all the generations that come forward, or all the things that are important to you. That's why this process is infinite.
Yeah. And then lastly, it's going to take time and discipline.
Yep.
Several years. Don't expect to get rich quick, but the rewards later on are worth all the effort.
Yep.
You meet anyone that's owned whole life like 10 years or longer, they all say the same thing. I wish I had bigger premiums.
Yep.
There's a reason why.
Yeah.
At that point, your understanding is way deeper of banking. What I'm able to do now, because I have the understanding, versus Kyle in 2 or 3 years into my system, I can move way faster now with a much larger system. There's a compound effect to all of this. You got to commit to that time and consistency, though.
Yeah. And it's true, because you don't know what you don't know, right? It goes back to the old adages, you don't know what it's like to be chased by a bear until you've been chased by a bear. Only Jim King would know that.
That's right.
But once you've also experienced, oh man, this gives me the freedom and control that I'm looking for, then it's like the floodgates open up. And this is what I've experienced. This is what my clients have experienced. Yourself, your clients, all once they hit that 3, 4, 5 year period, they're like, oh my gosh. Through a little bit of education, a little bit of imagination, they're just running wild. They're running rampant right now. They're like, there's all kinds of opportunities that they couldn't even imagine 3 years ago or 5 years ago or 10 years ago.
Right. But it all starts with that first step.
First step.
You got to start the process.
So, now you do have just want to make a mention. You mentioned watch your videos. Those videos are located where?
On our website, factumfinancial.com. Just go to our resources page. We have an entire course on this for anyone. Business owners, investors, you want the basics, you want strategies, family banking, it's all there.
So go educate yourself, start imagining what it would be like, what your life would be like, and what your family's, how it's going to impact your family if you start implementing this process. Thank you.